There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn, the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and to another episode of Zooming In, an occasional series. It's actually not even all that occasional. It's pretty much twice a week of chats with bookish social media luminaries the world over about bookish articles and stuff online, bookish literary books, articles about publishing, whatever. And I'm delighted to welcome back for his second appearance, because his first appearance was just, he made a big splash. Brian of the fabulous BookTube channel, Bookish. Hello,
Actually,
Brian.
hi, Shawn. Thanks for having me on again. I appreciate it.
And we're here to talk about an article that was published in The Atlantic at the end of August. And the title is The Blurb Problem Keeps Getting Worse by Helen Lewis. We're also going to dip into another article from The Guardian about the blurb scandal involving some asshole named Jordan Peele, Michael Jordan. What's his Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, I like Jordan Peele.
That's the asshole Jordan Peterson. I
Yeah,
shouldn't get confused.
you should just make that the title for this Zoom. You get a whole lot of clicks, probably.
But let's. I think the meat of our chat's going to be about the article in the Atlantic. But Brian, what did you make of this article?
Somehow I felt like, well, if you're talking about the one about Jordan Peterson, somehow I felt like the slimy use of lines from critics that had been taken out of context, and I don't know what to call it when you put ellipses in to take out the words you don't want, to make it seem like these critics were praising Jordan Peterson's book, perfectly fit Jordan Peterson's Jordan Peterson sliminess.
Absolutely. And it was the only way they could get a positive blurb for the paperback edition was to take down reviews out of context in order to generate an
Yeah.
ellipsis laden blurb. And
Yeah.
it's actually against the law, apparently,
Is it?
to
I didn't know.
misrepresent stuff
Oh
like
well.
that. So
Yeah.
I hope at the end of the article in Guardian, it said there's laws against this kind of stuff. But
Well, there should be. If I write a terrible review of a book and somebody somehow makes it seem like I liked it, then they're clearly misrepresenting what I thought. So, if I ever write a book review about a terrible book, I'll make sure that every line says something about it that's negative. So,
I think I missed it, but I'm sure you have ranted about Jordan Peterson on your channel, have you not?
I think I've talked about him, but I don't think I've ever said, here's a video I'm going to talk about Jordan Peterson, or put his name in my Saturday Hodgepodge list or something like that. About the time I started thinking about doing it, I think he kind of self-destructed, at least in terms of having a reputation that I think people outside of the extremes would once respected. There was a time, when Jordan Peterson, I think, was respected, and that book, 10 Rules, 12 Rules, or whatever, sold lots of copies, and it seemed mostly benign. And he just kind of, I think, lost his mind after that. Or he was exposed for the, bigot that he is, which is definitely something I think that applies to him correctly. Truly despicable to take people's words out of context and make their meaning different than their intended meaning. I don't think there's, and the only, like we were saying, the only good thing about that was it perfectly fit with Jordan Peterson, that it would be
Absolutely.
his book that they were talking about. So,
And shame on Penguin Books for doing that.
yeah, that's kind of, well, I don't know how much you want to get into my anti-capitalist ranting, but anyway, we'll move on from.
I'm sure that it's going to fit into the rest of our discussion. So the article in the Atlantic by Helen Lewis, "The Blurb Problem Keeps Getting Worse," had a lot of stuff that I'm dying to hear your thoughts on as well.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And some things I certainly didn't know about that. Like the blurb for what John was it John Donne? John Donne about Shakespeare,
Yes.
and Erasmus about Thomas More. She trying to track down some of the first blurbs, or somebody had, and I thought that was really funny. I hadn't no idea that had been going on that long. And
Oh,
it would
that long.
actually, the publishers put it on the cover or put it on the book somewhere. So I was
So this
surprised
is
to know that blurb's been around that long.
what was your attitude? What was your opinion about blurbs before you read these articles, and how if at all has it changed?
I've never really been a blurb reader. When I go to the bookstore, I usually know what books I'm getting. And so very rarely do I pick up a book that I've never heard of and turn it over to read the blurbs and see what other people have said about it. That almost never happens. When I decide to buy a book, being kind of, thrifty, let's say, when I decide to buy a book, I want to make sure that this is a book I want to spend money on. And so nothing on the cover and nothing about the cover design is probably going to sell me the book or make me not buy it, because I've gone saying these are the books I'm looking for, and if I find them, this is what I'm going to buy. So blurbs don't affect me, but I do read blurbs after I buy the book, which is, completely bass-ackward, as my dad would say. Why do I care what people thought after I bought the book and decided to read it? But I just find that kind of, I found, and now I'm probably a little bit disenchanted. I always found that kind of thing to see if there were, I read the blurbs, if there is a reviewer that I know who said something about the book that was positive, another writer. And so, so those kind of things kind of like help set me up for, I guess, or make me create some excitement about reading the book once I'd owned it. But they don't sell books to me. So for me, it doesn't work the way the author of the article described it, as a means to sell books. And I wonder how many people are actually sold by blurbs. But
Well, I have to say that I've been a blurb cynic long before I read this article, and now I feel quite justified in having been cynical. And so I do kind of wince when I hear booktubers pay a lot of attention when they're doing a book haul video or whatever to what the blurbs say, because I just assume that the author who has penned the blurb probably hasn't read the book or has been pressured by their publisher to supply the blurb. And there is a lot, according to this article, that is, to a certain degree, to a fairly large degree, it's a racket. I just think they're propaganda.
yeah, I think they're definitely that. And I don't think a publisher, obviously, if you sent if a publisher sends a book out to, I don't know, 20 people, 20 authors to get a blurb, and they get back, 7 negative blurbs, well, they're not using them. So, it's just, no matter how you look at it, it's just marketing. You're going to try to find the best little comments you can. And I think the authors know that. And I think authors kind of think about themselves as being almost like a craft union, and they're not going to like betray one another. If you send it to an author and the author reads it and wants to blurb it, the blurb they're going to have something positive to say. And so, like you were saying, to me, they're relatively meaningless in terms of convincing somebody to buy a book, but apparently publishers think that they're quite valuable.
This article does a really good job of showing why publishers think that they're quite valuable and how things have evolved from the good old days, supposedly good old days, when there was always a hardcover edition, and a year later the paperback came out, and the blurbs pretty much consisted of honest excerpts from the book reviews back in the days when there was lots of book review sections in newspapers and magazines, and those have all but disappeared. And so now these blurbs are they're solicited from and coming from the peers, the authors that the publisher approaches. So it's a
Right.
whole different thing than it used to be. There occasionally are blurbs that I do believe, like, what was the name of that book? I should have had this ready. There was a book from about 2016 or 2017, a debut novel. And and I can't remember. I'll remember by the time I edit the video, and I'll put the cover up. But it was a book that I thought was really good with a terrible ending. And Stephen King blurbed it, and he said, I couldn't have written this book was so good that I don't think I could have written a book as good as this or something. And I thought, well, that's a blurb.
Yeah,
Unless he's just making it up. And he does apparently blurb a lot, but that
he
one went
does.
above and beyond. And so I thought, okay,
Well,
that one does kind of suck me in.
that feels kind of honest, because he can't just say that over and over again, because somebody's going
That's
to pick
right.
up on you said that like the last 10 books you blurbed. And so, even if he didn't read the whole thing, if he read half of it, thought, wow, this is better than anything I've ever written, then it seemed like an honest reaction. I thought it was funny in the article where they had like the list of words where you could tell, that the
Electrifying.
I hadn't really read it, but they were just going to say something positive, because you see that a lot. I assume some people, people accuse me of being naive, and it's hard to be accused of being naive when you're 56 years old, but I assume there
Just
are still
imagine
some
how it feels when you're 57, Brian.
well, I'll know soon enough. I guess I'll know in about a year. So I assume there's some people who are honest and are, read the book and, give their honest opinion. And, or maybe they read the book and go, I can't give you a positive blurb. So they just don't.
Right.
But that to me would be, that feels like the thing you would do that would have some integrity and lend some integrity to this. But I know that an author who writes themselves wants people to blurb their book. And so it's kind of, quid pro quo kind of thing. I say something
Oh,
nice
well,
about your book, you say something nice about mine.
quid pro quo is a very sophisticated phrase. I prefer to go with the word that this coined for this article, which was a blurble jerk.
Right.
You
Yeah.
blurb my book, I'll blurb yours. There's a word for the ages. Ronan Heston was on my Friday Reads last week, and he talked about his new book cover and about how important covers are to him and the cover art. And he
Right.
doesn't allow blurbs on his books because he doesn't want deface the beautiful cover design. And
Yeah.
I think I was impressed by that.
And based on, I assume that when Ronan Hession blurbs a book for somebody else, or he says something positive about a book, he really meant it. He seems like an author with integrity. And like I said, he restores my faith that there are people like that out there in every walk of life. They may not be the majority, and they're certainly probably not the people that get the most attention, but that makes me feel better about things.
I guess I wish it was more like the good old days, or the bad old days, or whatever they were, when the blurbs were pulled from reviews. And I mean, then you can get into a whole discussion about how, that same dynamic could be present in book reviewing. And I'm sure that it was, to a certain degree, that if you're reviewing a book by your best friend, you're not going to do a takedown review. So that there would be lots of reasons why the sincerity would be questionable. But I think this whole thing about, well, sometimes pressuring, but certainly soliciting reviews from other writers, I think it's just kind of a scam. Now, the article makes another interesting point, makes several interesting points, but one of the other ones was that the blurbs are actually not for us, the common reader. They're for the book buyers, the bookstores,
yeah,
and
that's probably true. I mean, I know the article made some reference to maybe there being a chain of events. You get a good enough blurb from a known enough author, you get on like Reese Witherspoon's reading list, and therefore buyers are going to more likely to buy your book and put them on the front table in bookstores and stuff like that. I don't think it was this article, but I was reading somewhere an article about book selling where the bookseller said, I could sell whatever book I put on the table at the front, I can sell like 150 extra copies of that book just because it's on the table. People walk in and see, oh, this must be an important, good book. It's on the table. So, that's kind of where I get back into the marketing thing and the I guess inherent unfairness of capitalism in terms of book selling and how I think it just kind of, and there's no way around it that I can think of. Publishers or businesses, they want to make money, and as there are fewer and fewer publishers and more consolidation, the ability of a book not pushed by one of these publishers to make a huge splash seems to be more and more limited, particularly given all the dynamics of blurbs and booksellers and the book buyers for businesses and prime location for selling in stores and all those kinds of things are all kind of controlled, I think, or I don't mean to sound like I'm a conspiracy theory, but are all kind of controlled by this desire to make money. And, everybody wants to do that. So authors included.
And as I listen to you say that, it makes me think the article is actually more nuanced than the way that I'm talking about it. That there were things in here that made me think, oh, actually, it's not completely garbage. Like there was one example from a Black British writer in his book, who I'd never heard of, Tomiwa Owolade, his first book, This Is Not America, Why Black Lives Matter in Britain. His publisher solicited blurbs from writers, and he got one from, who was it? Oh, the Dutch author Ian Baruma, and the author Owolade. He said, I didn't know him. I've never met him, and
Right.
it really gave me a real boost that he would give such a nice, seemingly authentic blurb. So
and there was another author who was like just blown away by the fact that somebody had sent in and I thought, well, that's charming that you that you're still kind of a big enough fan. And I don't know that there are authors who I consider myself to be kind of a fan of, not necessarily like, a fan of Taylor Swift, but a fan of. And, as an author, it would be, I think, kind of humbling and, incredibly rewarding to have somebody blurb your book who you admired like that. And then it also couldn't help but boost sales probably in some way or get you into the bookstores.
Well, and I think so. I still feel pretty negative because I think if there was far less blurbing going on, then we'd probably take the blurbs more seriously. And because I think you really have to go above and beyond to create a blurb that's going to
Right.
sound authentic. You're going to have to say, like Stephen King, "Oh, I couldn't have written a book this good."
Right. And
Right.
the blurb location seems to matter. I mean, that whatever blurb's on the front cover has to be really short. It has to be really short and really powerful. Like, I could never have written a book this good. That's one little sentence. You put it like the bottom corner, top corner, Stephen King's name, whatever, and people can go, "Oh, Stephen King thinks it's a great book." And then you turn over on the back and you have the back cover blurbs. And the one thing that irritates me about back cover blurbs that I think is sneaky, that a lot of times the back cover blurbs are blurbs about the author's other books.
Oh,
Like,
that
that are
makes
not
me mad
about the
too.
book you're holding. And that just seems really disingenuous to me. You give me a blurb from a book that, Cormac McCarthy published 15 years ago. All right, I'll buy that book. Why wouldn't, and so it seems like you're trading. And then you have all those inside the front cover of a paperback. Those are my favorite, where you just have that long section of 3 or 4
7 pages of
with blurbs and excerpts and stuff like that. Those are the ones I like to read before I start reading the book, because the chance somebody's going to open up the book and read those seems even increasingly remote, that people would even know they were there and want to read the one that's at the bottom of page 3.
Now that's very interesting because I hadn't thought of that in preparing for this chat, but now that you mention it, I don't read them, but I do think that I'm swayed or impressed by if a book has gotten this many blurbs, there is
Right.
something in the quantity that's saying, okay, well, it has been well received.
I was thinking about this because I published a book a long time ago. Well, I think you probably know that. It was a biography, and it had a blurb on the back cover. When I read the blurb, I thought, I really wish they hadn't put this blurb in the book, because it made my book sound more boring than it was. I thought, nobody's going to read that blurb and buy this book. Why would you put that on there? So I thought I have probably the most bland, non-specific blurb in blurb history on the back of the book.
Well, they didn't identify which writer this was, but one writer offered to provide a blurb for what was it, £1,000 or
Yeah.
£1,000? So, Brian, if you are looking for a much sexier blurb for your next book, call
Oh,
me.
well, I will. Probably can't give you $1,000 or pounds. Maybe $5 pounds
Well,
cents.
I'll take it.
I thought my first reaction to the people being paid to write blurbs was just absolute disgust. How horrible this is, and then the other part of me, the anti-capitalist part of me, I guess, and as the descendant of lots of labor union or a few labor union activists, part of me said, hell yeah, it's work. You're getting paid. You should get paid. And I kind of have that theory about lots of things. I'm doing this work for you. You should pay me. I in some ways, I think that's fair. I think that, of course, the abuse of it is that people just write something positive just for the money, which is probably 99% of those. But, it's work. It may not seem like work to lots of people, but it's work.
Well, Brian, we didn't discuss your fee for this appearance on my channel, so I guess we'll have to negotiate that later. But what a fun and really quite substantive chat. That was great, Brian, as
Oh,
I expected nothing less.
well, thank you, Shawn.